Hello, guys out there. Welcome to another day with PE Slick Podcast. It's your host, Ranger Matt. Forgive me for that noise out there. It's a motorcycle going by. Normally, I do stuff with Soaps Pass as well, but today is something totally different. I have a music producer from the UK joining me. His name is Joe Boyd. And let me bring him along here. Let me see. Can I get him there? Oh, yes, there he is. Let me bring him aboard. Hey, Joe.
Hey there.
How you doing?
Okay.
Good.
So are we live on the internet?
Yes, we are. This is a podcast that I host every other Monday, every other week.
Okay.
How things going in the UK during this pandemic?
Oh, I mean, we're not as bad as Boris isn't as bad as Trump, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah. Um, thank you for taking the time to come on board and talk for a while. I've never had a music producer come on board here, and I've never talked with nobody in the UK, so this is new. I appreciate it.
Cool, pleasure. I mean, I'm Don Simpson was a fascinating guy, and it's good to see that he's remembered.
Yeah, yeah. You know, as a kid, I didn't really know Don and Jerry, but I knew Beverly Hills Cop and Bad Boys, other things that they did. And of course, Don passed in '96, and I was like 4 or 5 at the time. But like I mentioned, nobody really talks about Don Simpson anymore. And I've done some short films, and now I'm doing a documentary about a TV show, and I was trying to put something together about Don. So that's why I reached out to you and some others, maybe talk a bit about Don. I mean, how did you meet him?
Well, 1971, I was hired to work for Warner Brothers Films as the title was Director of Music Services, which meant in charge of film scores and any music that films needed.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, Don had been working there for a little while, and I think there was a guy who was the head of advertising and publicity called Dick Lederer, who was a great character, and he had hired Don, and he put me and Don together because Don was like, the sort of counterculture guy in the marketing department. And so he thought, you young guys, music guys, you'd hit it off. And we did. And we got along great. And he eventually kind of was, they didn't really know what to do with Don in the marketing department. I don't know. Do you know the story of how he got to Warner Brothers?
No, I know he joined Paramount, but no, I don't.
Yeah, that was later. That was much later. I mean, what happened was Don, I don't know how much of his backstory you know, but he was from Valdez, Alaska. He went to University of Oregon, dropped out, worked summers as digging ditches, and somehow ended up in San Francisco working for an ad agency. And Warner Brothers, when they released Woodstock, the movie,
Mm-hmm.
they hired this ad agency to promote the film in the Bay Area. And Lederer was so knocked out with the job that Don did. Don just blew him away at how together he was and how imaginative and everything. And so he said, come to Burbank and work for us. And so they brought him to Burbank, but then they didn't really know what to do with him. It was kind of a straight movie studio, and Don was, young. And so they sent him out on the road for 6 months to go around to all the college towns in America and make a sort of notebook of all the movie theaters and which are the hip publications, where they should advertise, how they should market youth movies, in those college towns. And he did this incredible report, like a huge file of everything to know about how to promote to college-age audiences in America. They never even opened it. They just lay there on the table. And I think Lederer thought maybe I could figure out some way. So I put him in charge of coordinating marketing between the record company and the film company.
Right.
And I did a film about Jimi Hendrix when I was out there, and he did all the marketing promotion for that. And, you know, there were other occasions where there was coordination between the record business and the film business, and Don was in charge. And then I left. I decided I didn't really want to be a music coordinator. I wanted to be a producer because I produced this film about Hendrix. And Don said, Joe, don't leave me here alone. You know, let me come with you. And so he and I got an office in Hollywood, and we started optioning properties. And, but I was still producing records. And I had a couple of hits. I had a record called Midnight at the Oasis with Maria Muldaur, and which was in the top 10 and everything. And so I was kind of busy and making money, but Don wasn't making any money. And he was very frustrated. And I mean, we stayed friends. But he was frustrated that he thought that I wasn't commercial enough. You know, it's like I liked European art movies, and he liked them too, but he thought, you know, you can't let your mind go that way, you know. And Don was incredibly smart. I mean, incredibly smart guy. And he read like a sponge. He just soaked up books. He'd read a book a day. And but eventually he ran out of money, and it was really, he was hanging on in Hollywood by his fingernails. He had a fender bender in his car, you know, and he couldn't drive his car, and he couldn't afford to get it fixed. And he went to buy something at the supermarket, and they pulled his credit card because his card had been refused too many times.
Wow.
So he was really on his way back to Alaska. And at that moment, a friend of his gave him a number at Paramount to call that Dick Silbert, who was one of the heads of production, was looking for an assistant. And so Don borrowed a car, went to Paramount, applied for the job, and got the job. $300 a week, working for this guy who was like one of the heads of production. And I used to go meet Don like at 11 o'clock at night or midnight at this Mexican restaurant opposite Paramount, because he never left the lot until 11. Right. Every night, Don would sit in the office. Everybody else would go home. And Don would take a film, a Paramount production from the past, or the current ones in development. And he would read the files. He'd read the budget. He'd read the casting reports. He'd read all the contracts. He read everything. And then, you know, he'd go and we'd have a beer and a taco at midnight, and he'd go home, and then he'd be in the office the next morning at 9 o'clock. And about, I don't know, 8 months after he got there, the whole regime that was working there, all the heads of production were fired.
Wow.
And Michael Eisner came in. He was the new head of production. He'd been head of ABC television. And Eisner came in, and one by one, he interviewed all the mid-level employees who were still there, who were not like the heads of production that got fired.
Right.
And eventually, there must have been, I don't know, 15 or 20 guys, you know, or women. Eventually, it was Don's turn. And he came in, and this is Don's report to me. Eisner said, you know, there's this project here called such and such. Do you know anything about that? And Don said, yeah. The script was turned in on April 15th. The comments are negative. It costs us $50,000 for a second draft. You know, we have to pick up the option in 30 days. Blah, blah, blah. You know, oh,
Right.
very nice. There's this other thing. Do you know anything about this? Don knew everything. And at the end of the interview, Eisner hit the intercom to talk to his secretary and said, "Get this guy an office next to mine." And that was the beginning of Don's career in Hollywood.
Wow. You know, it's something from what I've been reading and understanding about Don is that he really had an eye for movies, and it was like he could have been our next president or something, because it felt like he knew so much and was talented in a lot of things as far as that goes. And but I guess it's just ironic that unfortunately he had his own personal problems. I mean, how much about that life do you know about that as far as his problems with drugs and stuff?
Well, when I knew him, he didn't really use drugs. I mean, he was not a drug person. He was very athletic. He and I would play tennis. He beat the shit out of me in tennis. He was very, you know, he was very good in tennis, a real sports nut. He watched a lot of sports. And he didn't drink a lot, you know. But I would say that he was, at some level, he was a tortured soul. And, you know, I don't know. And I know that his parents were very conservative Christians and didn't really approve of his life. At least that's my understanding. Although Jerry told me, I spoke to Jerry briefly after Don's funeral, and Jerry told me that Don had told him for years what a nightmare his parents were and all this kind of stuff. And he met Don's mother at the funeral and said she was the sweetest woman, a really lovely woman, you know, that he really liked. And so, you know, who knows? But the other thing that was certainly true about Don was that he had issues in relationships. He had a true love at the University of Oregon when he went there. And he had to go work. He went back home to Alaska and dug ditches one summer. And he came back to Oregon for his sophomore year, or June, I think it was his sophomore year.
Right.
And she'd gone off with another guy. And it kind of broke his heart. And he became very bitter towards women. And he was, you know, he in the time I knew him, he had a number of relationships with sex workers. You know, he kind of liked the honesty of that sort of, you know, he wasn't paying them, but they were working, you know, on the side.
Right.
And he believed, you know, one of the things that he did when I knew him, he explored. He and I together actually went and dabbled for about a few weeks with Scientology because he was fascinated by the things of the mind, you know, spiritual journey, the growing power, how you could be powerful as an individual without drugs.
Right.
And Scientology was a blowout as far as we were concerned. But we both did EST. And he loved EST and got a lot out of it. The EST seminars training, which was one of those, you know, life-enhancing experiences in the 70s. A lot of people did.
Right.
And he was fascinated by stuff like that. But it went from those kinds of experiences. And once he got promoted at Paramount and got making a lot of money and became more powerful, and, you know, I saw less and less of him. I also moved back to England, so we weren't in the same town. And we stayed in touch a bit. But I remember seeing him, I think in Paris, and he was completely changed. He was, he bloated. He used to be trim.
Right.
And suddenly he was this burly, fat guy. And he told me he'd been in Switzerland doing a blood rinse. Like you go to a clinic where they put, like, I don't know, monkey glands in your blood and shit. I don't know. Right. It was kind of some far out idea of how to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
He was very into cryogenics and living forever.
Right.
And he started little by little to get into chemical ways to achieve the same kind of goals that he'd set for himself through spiritual disciplines that hadn't really worked. And I think, like a lot of people who had a big success, it didn't make him as happy as he thought it would.
Right.
And, but I can only really talk about the younger Don, because by the time he was making Beverly Hills Cop and was being hailed as one of the kings of Hollywood, I was living in England. We were talking on the phone once a year, twice a year. That was it. And so I didn't know him as well. And it was heartbreaking because the Don I knew was not a drug person. He did not take all those pills. He worked out every day. He looked after his body. He ate healthy food. He nourished his mind, and but he was a mixture of contradictions. Anyway, I'm just rattling on here. What you can feel free to ask me some questions.
No, listen. It's fine. You're the first one who's talked to me a bit about Don. I mean, I'm sure it's hard to talk about him, but like I said, nobody talks about Don today as much. I mean, people do when talking about the making of the movies, but not much today as far as what he done. And that's why I wanted to put like a little documentary film together about him currently today for today's generation, about him. I mean, I know he has problems, but he was also smart. He made a lot of movies, and it changed the world. I mean, a lot of movies I saw that him and Jerry made, I didn't even know they had made. I didn't know they made Bad Boys or Beverly Hills Cop, and he worked at Paramount because I knew Michael Eisner from when he was at Disney, him and Jeffrey Katzenberg. So I didn't know Don had knew all of them. So,
yeah, I mean, and also the first film that he wasn't credited as producer, but it was made at Paramount, and he was the executive in charge of Top Gun, and that was absolutely his creation. I mean, he shepherded the script, and Don had a great ear for music. He loved music. He listened to music all the time. And actually, when I was at Warner Brothers, and Don was at Warner Brothers, one of the records that got made there was a solo album that did not sell,
right,
by Jennifer Warnes. But Don loved the album, and he never forgot Jennifer Warnes. And so when he was supervising Top Gun, he said, "We need a song," and he's the one who put Joe Cocker together with Jennifer Warnes and got chose the song "Up Where We Belong," and which absolutely helped make that film a hit.
Right. Oh, that was An Officer and a Gentleman with that song, "Up Where We Belong." That
right.
was, yeah.
Oh, An Officer and Gentleman. Was that the name of it? Officer and Gentleman? Okay, you're right. Sorry, it was Top Gun. Yeah, no, you're right. But wasn't that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that was a good movie. That, by the way, that and
Yeah, yeah. That was done. That was. Sorry, I got it confused. They're both about military romance with a pilot or something. You know.
right.
And so and I think all of the films that Don produced were very strong on the musical tie-ins, the hit records, the cool music tracks. That was a very, very important part with Don. And he and Jerry were, you know, he and Jerry were friends for a long time before before Don even went to Paramount. He and Jerry were close friends. And then when he was at Paramount, I think Jerry then produced films for Paramount. I think Jerry might have been the producer on Officer and Gentleman. And so they started that couple.
And American Gigolo at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong though, because I mean maybe it's a far-fetched idea on my part, but from watching Don in interviews and then the documentary they did on him that I emailed you on that
Yeah.
I kind of felt like through it all that maybe Don was somebody who just needed, maybe not to some people, but I always felt maybe Don was somebody that just needed a good brotherly hug to kind of say it's okay, it's going to be okay. Maybe he needed a good hug.
But he was also a hard guy to hug. You know, he was very proud and fiercely independent and no bullshit. And, you know, he didn't take easily to affection or softness. It's like the thing with women, you know, like he liked tough, hard-edged women. You know, if a girl melted, you know, said she loved him and wanted to be with him, you know, he was out the door quick. He couldn't handle that kind of affection, you know. And I mean, there is a book about him, you know, and so I mean, people at the time, I mean, in the 90s, everybody knew about Don, and a lot of people wrote and talked, and et cetera, and I think, but you're right, he's kind of, history has moved on, and people don't talk about it much anymore.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually waiting for that book to come. I actually ordered me a copy of it just to give insight too. But like I said, I wanted to also reach out to some people who knew Don personally or worked with him, and just to give some insight. I'm trying to get in touch with Michael Eisner and hopefully Jerry Bruckheimer at some point. Maybe talk to them as well, and Frank Mancuso, Chippy Kassenberg, and some others that worked at Paramount that knew Don as well. And yeah. I just found out he had a brother named Larry who was in the movie business as well.
Yeah, you know, he was so unforthcoming about his family. He never talked about his family to me, or as far as I know, to Jerry even. I'm trying to think. There was somebody else. What's his name? Steve Tisch, who is now the owner of the New York Giants football team. Steve Tisch is the guy that got him the job at Paramount. He's the guy that put Don together with Dick Silbert. At that time, Steve, you know, he's from a wealthy New York family. I think they had an interest in the New York Giants, and he wasn't involved. He was a kid, and he was young, and he was out in Hollywood trying to make it as a producer. And he knew Silbert, but I don't know. I don't have any contact for him. But if you, you know, Steve Tisch at the New York Giants mentioned Don Simmons' name, he might pick up the phone. You know,
right. to kind of go off topic a little bit, we'll get back to Don, but I wanted to ask you, how did you find the group? Forgive me if I'm pronouncing their name wrong. ABBA. They made the song "Mamma Mia." How did you find that group? I love that song "Mamma Mia."
Well, I didn't. I listen. I when I was. I mean, it's a very weird sidetrack in my biography, and a bit, like the one that got away, the big fish that was on the hook that got away. I was living in London, and a friend of mine played me a record by the Hepstars, which was a Swedish 60s pop group. And Benny Andersson was the lead singer and the songwriter for the Hepstars.
Right.
And I had this record of theirs, which was nice, really nice tune. And I was in Stockholm on business, and I went into a record store and I saw a record, because I knew the Hepstars were over. They'd broken up and they were finished. Right. And I bought this record by Benny Andersson and Bjorn Ulvaeus, like these two guys. And it was kind of pop, folky, all in Swedish. But I bought the record. And right. it was good. It had some really great melodies and everything. And I kind of was thinking to myself, because the Hepstars song was in English. So right. I knew that Benny Andersson could write in English.
Right.
This record was all in Swedish. And so I had a publishing company in London, and we were having some success. We had some success in Scandinavia. So I wanted a publisher in Scandinavia to administer our rights in Scandinavia. That's what you did at sub-publishers. And so I looked on the back of this record and I saw Polar Music, and I thought, well, hey, maybe if I called them and give them my publishing rights that I've got from England, maybe we can talk about whether Benny Andersson is writing any songs in English, and maybe I could get the rights, Right. And so I went to Stockholm to meet with Polar Music, and he said, the owner, Stig Anderson, said, well, hey, you want to meet the guys? The girlfriends are playing tonight, are performing in a cabaret.
Right. And
they're going. I'm going to go with them. Why don't you join us? So I go down there. Me and Stig and Benny and Bjorn are all watching, and Jetta and whatever her name, the other girl, in high hats and mesh stockings and high kicking and canes and sort of singing funny songs in Swedish on stage.
Right.
And then afterwards, we all went and hung out at a bar and talked. And I said to Ben, man, you should write in English, And we talked. They were obsessed with R&B. We spent the whole evening talking about talking about Otis Redding and Stax and Motown records and stuff like that. They had this big collection. I went back to Benny's flat, and we listened to records all night. And then I went back to London, and I proposed a contract to Stig where he'd have my rights in Scandinavia, and I'd have his rights in the English-speaking world.
Right.
And then, like the day that I sent that letter off, I got a call from Warner Brothers offering me a job to move to LA. And so, my company was struggling, and I was tired of being broke. And I got a great offer from Warner Brothers. So I said, okay. So I never followed up the deal with Polar Music. And that was my one night with Benny and Bjorn. So that's it. That's the whole story.
Right. Okay. So when you was younger, do you recall what the first instrument you picked up that made you want to get into music when you was a kid or a teenager?
Well, I'm not a musician. I took piano lessons as a kid.
Right.
My grandmother was a classical pianist, and I took lessons from her. But I never had the discipline or the devotion to stick with an instrument. I just decided when I was 17, I was going to be a record producer. So that was it. I didn't need to play an instrument. I got to listen.
I gotta talk to my coworker about ABBA because he is such he loves the rock and roll era of the '60s, and he's a huge Beatles fan.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, he's into the era. Um, so what are you currently working on today in 2020? Even though we're in the pandemic and everything else that's going on.
Well, I'm very fortunate because I'm writing a book, and the pandemic doesn't deflect that.
Right.
So I'm writing a book about, I guess you could call it world music. I'm writing a book there's chapters about salsa and samba and reggae and all the ways in which these different musics affected our culture in America and England, and how it circles around, and African music and tango and all this sort of stuff. It's been a long project, but I'm coming to the end. And I have to say, it's a terrible thing that's going on in the world today, but the pandemic has probably helped me finish my book quicker.
Right. Well, when it gets finished, let me know because I would love to read it.
Okay, I will. I'm going to put you on my mailing list. I got a I do a newsletter every once in a while.
Okay. But I wanted to ask though, what is it like in the UK? 'Cause I've never been out there before. I'm over here on the east side in Baltimore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know what's it like. It's the world gets more and more similar, but I've lived here for 50 years off and on. I go back and forth. I was in LA, I was in New York, but I always came back to London, even though I was born in Massachusetts, grew up in New Jersey. I've been up and down that Amtrak corridor many, many times. And the last time, actually, my most memorable time in Baltimore. I don't know. I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember this, but there was a time. It was '99 or something. Yeah, no, you weren't old enough. You probably don't remember this, but you were alive.
Yeah, I was.
The Baltimore Orioles played the Cuban national baseball team.
Okay.
Yards. And I was producing a Cuban band from Cuba,
Right.
kind of an all-star band called Cubanismo. And they were on tour in America, and we got a call from the Orioles that they were interested in having them come and play before the game between the Orioles and the Cuban team. So we got on the train, we came down to Baltimore, we got met at the station, taken to the park, set up, played for like an hour. People were coming in, people were dancing in the area where the fans come in. Great. It was a great scene. And the game was amazing. It was like, I think the final score was something like, I don't know, 15-13. I think the Cubans beat the Orioles. And it was a wild game and a wild night, and that's about my best memory of Baltimore.
Yeah, I was at least, let me see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I was like at least 7 or 8 years old in '99. I was born in '91. I would have to ask my coworker if he knows about that because I don't think my mother would know. She's more into football. But yeah. Before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you, and again, thank you for coming on board talking with me today. But I just wanted to ask you, again, Don Simpson was again, he had his problems, but he was an interesting guy to me, and he was smart, knew the business. I mean, I know it's been some time since he passed away, but do you have any idea in terms of where he would be at if he was alive today?
Don had the ability and the intelligence and the ability to be running Hollywood, you know, to be, you know, he could have been a king in Hollywood. You know, he had that, and he also had a determination. He wanted, you know, one of the things, I mean, we really got along great, and he really, I think he really liked me. I loved him, you know, but he was determined to make commercial films. He wasn't interested in good reviews, you know,
Right.
and so much as box office. He believed that that was, you had to focus, you had to be like that, you know, and go for the gold ring.
Right.
And that was the only place we disagreed, just because it didn't interest me so much. I was sort of, I felt I needed to have an emotional connection with the music or the films or whatever that I did, that I was involved in. And it wasn't, I didn't think he was wrong. There was nothing wrong with the approach. It was just different. And so
Right.
we clash sometimes about that. And I think he sometimes scratched his head because he felt like I was well connected. I knew a lot of people more than he did. Why I didn't become like a major player in Hollywood, he
Right.
felt, was due to the fact that I just didn't want it enough, or wasn't hard-headed enough. And
Right.
he was hard-headed enough. But somehow that need that he had for, I don't know, I guess the drugs were a compensation for the love that he couldn't give or receive, you know, in some way. Who knows? I mean, I'm not going to play amateur psychologist here,
Yeah.
but he was in some ways the most wonderful guy and a very sad guy. You know, it was so sad because he had so much to offer in a relationship, in a partnership, in creatively in making films. He had a huge amount to offer, and he put it all into the business, but he couldn't come up with a way to deal with his own personal demons.
Yeah. How did you find out he passed away? And did somebody tell you, or did you read about it?
I think I got a phone call from someone,
Okay.
somebody in Hollywood who knew him and me, and called me that day, and I got a hold of Jerry, and we spoke on the phone, and he told me when the funeral was going to be, and I was in London, and I just, you know, I was in the middle of a million things, and I couldn't come out for the funeral, and so I spoke to Jerry then after the funeral. He told me what had happened, et cetera, that he spoke to Don's mother, and that's it, really.
Okay. Just for a quick second here, I mean, we was talking about you, Don, and music. I'm gonna turn my phone around. There's an interview right here with Don talking a bit about music when he was making Beverly Hills Cop. I'm gonna turn my phone around
Okay.
real quick here.
Jerry, in that I don't see music being used in films as being this overwhelming trend dash fad. It's been around for a long time. It's a question of the way it's been used. Having been part of Saturday Night Fever in Grease in my tenure as president of production at Paramount, I was part of those films, and I saw it being done then. And it is being done a bit different today. I think people are overstating the issue, quite simply. Jerry and I are musically oriented. It has to do with our age. It has to do with our inclination, our background. It had a lot to do with the way we handle Flashdance. A lot of people don't know it, but we shot Flashdance without any of the music that was in the picture. We used what's called a click track. We did all the music after the picture was finished, which is an unusual way to do it and a risky way to do it. We were advised not to. We're happy to say that we turned out to be right in that instance.
That's just a little clip about Don.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he was. Listen, I mean, yeah, I remember. I forgot about Flashdance. Flashdance. You know, that was that was sort of almost. I mean, I wouldn't say it's where we parted company because we never fell out. But I think he gave me the script of Flashdance and told me, because it was being directed by a guy that I knew about, named
Right.
Floyd Mutrux, who had done a film that Warner Brothers had released, and I just thought, oh please, this seems so cheesy, you know, and so I didn't give him any enthusiastic feedback. He thought, being a music film, I should take an interest, just as a fan, you know, as a friend. And I was like, not my cup of tea, Don. You know, I hope it does great, you know, but don't ask me to premiere, you know, kind of thing.
Right.
And I think that probably annoyed him a little bit. But what you can hear there is how obsessed he was with controlling the music. You know, shooting all those dance scenes in Flashdance to a click track, so
Right.
that he can actually produce exactly the right music to picture after the fact is a gamble, as he says, but it's very obsessive, and it's typically Don, you know, to control exactly what the music is going to sound like. Because if you shot that stuff to a live track, you're stuck with it, kind of, and it'd be very hard to replace it. And
Right.
And he didn't want that. He wanted to really be sure he could get the right production and the right song and the right sound and everything right for those scenes once he had the film edited. And it's anyway. Thanks for that. It's nice to see Don after so many years on the screen.
Yeah, somebody actually just posted that a few months ago, because I've never seen any interviews or behind the scenes of Flashdance or Beverly Hills Cop, and somebody posted that a few months ago with them talking about Beverly Hills and some of Flashdance a little bit. So, you know, I never really seen no footage or anything from Dawn at Paramount, or like I said, doing Flashdance. So once they posted that, you know, that was a big part of what I'm doing right now. Did you see the documentary when I emailed you the link? Were you able to
I
see it?
haven't looked at it yet. I'm afraid I've been busy. But I will. I really appreciate that. I really thank you so much for that. Because
Yeah.
I might have seen it at the time, but I don't remember it. And you know, so I'm probably going to wait and see it with my wife, who's never seen it. So
Okay. Yeah. Again, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. We also talked a bit about your music world as well, and I appreciate that, Joe. And once I get to a point where I've worked on it a little bit, but once I get to a point where I feel it's complete, I'll email you a link so you can see it and
okay,
to view
cool.
the documentary about Don. Um, by chance, did you happen to have any photos of you and Don from that time when you knew him?
I don't. You know, I have a feeling I might, but I'm not sure where they are. You know, if I'm one of my projects when I finish my book is to go through all my photographs and sort them out. And if I do, I'll get in touch. But I'm not. I can't think of one offhand.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
take it easy in the UK. Thanks again, and have a good day.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Oh, okay, he signed out. Well, guys, thanks again for tuning in for PE Slick Podcast. That was Joe Boyd. We talked a bit about Don Simpson. I'm trying to put a little story together about him because, like I mentioned, nobody really talks about Don anymore. So, and I felt like, you know, of course, he didn't know me, but he's somebody that I think should be talked about some more again. I even well, that's another story. But thanks for tuning in. And if you follow this channel, join me in about 2 hours at 4 o'clock. And I'm going to have Robert Newman, who played Josh Lewis on Guiding Light, on. And we'll go from there. So thank you. Till later.